And we're live, I think, right, Chris?
Yep.
Sweet. Awesome. I love how it automatically switches over. That's fantastic. So, welcome everybody to another Cyber Live webinar or live stream, however we want to call it. I'm really excited, but before we get started, first of all, I want to give a little bit of time for everybody to join in. So, we'll probably get started here in about 5 minutes. But I also have a question for you, Chris, because I don't know how this works. We're live, I think, right, Chris? And you are the pro when it comes to this. So, awesome. I love how it automatically switches over. Let me mute over here. I don't know if that was coming through. Apologies if it was. Now we're better. So I've got too many streams going on, too many windows going on. But my question for you, Chris, is I know we're streaming on multiple different platforms here. We've got the Cyber YouTube. We also have the Study GRC YouTube. So are we getting comments from all those platforms into the same feed, or how does that work? Can you enlighten me on how this works? Because I don't know.
Yeah, of course. So it's definitely connected on your end, and then so you can bring up the questions, but you can see some of them popping in here. So over on my end, you can see the paired coming in. That's the GRC Mafia over here with Study GRC.
Got it. So on Restream, it's pulling in all the comments, all the streams. But if I'm just looking at one of the YouTube streams, that's only that stream, right?
Correct.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's gonna be confusing, but my brain will eventually wrap around and get it working properly. So cool.
And then only
Fantastic.
you can pull them up on the screen too.
So if I click on, do I click on show or do I?
Yep.
GRC
So if you click on the show, then I'll pull it up below us.
Ah, cool. Okay, I did not know you could do that. All right, learning something new every single day. I'm really liking this format and this platform, by the way. So thank you, Chris, for teaching me and showing me how this works. This is a lot better than what we were doing before. So now if I hide it, then it goes away. Awesome. Okay. So yeah, if you are coming here from Study GRC, if you're the GRC Mafia, go ahead and represent. Let us know in the comments. And then if you're joining us here from the cyber side, also do the same thing so we can see who's who and where everybody is coming from. But thanks everybody for joining us today. I think this is going to be an awesome live stream. And more importantly, I think this is going to be a very important live stream because GRC is so important. And a lot of times, myself included, we tend to kind of ignore it, maybe because it's not our area of focus. But Chris is so passionate about it, so he can bring in that passion and teach us about it and show us how it works and how to get started and why it's so important. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really important live stream. You excited, Chris?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Cloud's pretty huge, and yeah, I absolutely love GRC. I think it gets a little bit of hate out there in the space, but it is absolutely crucial in today's world. I think if people understood a little bit more about what the objectives were for it, then it may be more accepted.
We also have the Hack Smarter Mafia. So representing, we actually have multiple communities coming up in here. So yeah, if you're from a different community too, feel free to shout it out. We'll put it up on here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh,
Okay, so like I
Tyler's
said,
popping
we're
in
going to
on your
start
side.
here in about 2 minutes. But anything that we should mention before we get started, Chris? I know we'll start with introductions and then we'll go into your presentations and slide, but you kind of also mentioned, how important GRC is and everything, but anything else that you can think of that we should mention as we're waiting here for people to trickle in?
Everything's a little bit of a trial and error situation here for sure. Everybody's always trying to figure it out. I've been live streaming for a year now. We just hit our 1 year mark and we still have difficulty, but with that part said, definitely drop your questions and so forth. Christoph over here, while I do my presentation, hopefully can keep up with chat and mark some of the different questions out. I'll most likely, we'll probably go through those after I go through the presentation just to make it easier. But definitely want to encourage everybody, ask questions. Even if it doesn't relate to exactly what we're talking about, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Well, and a great example of a good question to ask that doesn't really relate to what we're doing, but I think is still very important to know from Tyler Ramsby here. Chris, who is your favorite rapper?
Well, that's the, black hoodie on. Come on, Tyler. He knows this. I post it on all over the place all the time.
Any favorite songs that we should know about?
Yeah, so Tyler Ramsby has a couple different rap songs, and there's one called Black Hoodie On, which is absolutely awesome.
I wish I had a link pulled up. I should have done that while we're talking about it. But yeah,
It's
look it
okay.
up. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, right? So
I have a bookmark.
of course you do. Awesome. Let me paste it in here. So if I paste the message in Restream, it posts out. It says it can't post to some of the channels, but it should post it out, right? Yeah, there we go.
Correct. They'll
Cool. Okay.
post it out on yours, and then I
Yeah.
can throw it in mine.
Oh yeah, and then you mentioned it, but I also want to mention it, which is happy 1 year for Study GRC, especially the live streams. And I know you've been really, really busy with everything going on there. So congratulations on 1 year. That's a huge mark.
Yeah, yeah. Time flies by.
It does. Speaking of time flying by, it's been 5 minutes, so I think we're about ready to go.
All right, let's do this.
Cool. So what we'll do is it's a little bit different today. I'm going to blow through introductions because I really want to hand the baton over to Chris and have him get started and do this presentation so that we have enough time to go through that, and then also have enough time to go through the Q&A and questions. So a couple of housekeeping items. The first one is, yes, this is going to be recorded. Obviously, we're on YouTube here, so it's going to be posted on YouTube after the fact. And if you registered through our registration form, I'll also email you the link directly. So that way, if you forget or if you can't find it, super easy to get right into your inbox. If you didn't register through the web form and you can't find it, either DM myself or DM Chris on Discord. We're pretty easy to find either on there or on LinkedIn as well. And I'll be dropping some Discord links here in just a moment. And then we'll be able to DM you the link directly. So yes, this is going to be recorded. You can rewatch it however many times you need to. The second thing is, like Chris mentioned earlier, this is meant to be a Q&A type of format. So yes, of course, he's doing a presentation. But if there's a really good relevant question, then I'll just cut him off and I will prompt him for that question right there and then. And then for the others, we will hold it until the end and do about 15, 20 minutes of Q&A, depending on how much time is left. So go ahead and drop your questions as they come top of mind. You can put them in the comments and I will keep an eye on chat and make sure that we answer them. So that's the two main things I wanted to get out of the way. The third one is just a really quick introduction. And then after that, I'll hand it over to Chris and he can do his intro and go from there. So if we haven't met yet, if you're from Study GRC and you and I have not met, then welcome to Cyber's live streams. I appreciate you joining us today. My name is Christoph Limpelaer. I'm the founder and CEO at Cyber, cybr.com, and we are an AWS cloud security training platform that really focuses on hands-on learning with high-quality courses and one-click deploy hands-on labs. So we also have a lot of GRC-related types of training, both blue team and red team training for AWS Cloud Security. More on that towards the end as we talk more about resources for learning this stuff. But that's it for me and who I am. Now I'm going to hand it over to Chris. Take it away, Chris.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So my background's a little bit interesting. Basically, since November of 23, I've been interested with GRC. I came across Simply Cyber, and Jerry kind of, stole me over from my pursuit on blue teaming. And ever since then, this kind of snowballed into a study group that formed Study GRC. And then I got even more involved with Simply Cyber as well. Before that, for many years, I was just hobby IT and so forth. But yeah, so GRC is definitely a huge passion of mine. It makes it a lot easier when you are doing something that you really enjoy. I like reading through the NIST docs and so forth. And did you want to go through? Should I start the presentation here?
Well, just a quick comment on that. I don't think I've ever met somebody that's quite as passionate about reading through NIST documents. I know sometimes we all have to do it, but the level of passion you have for that is unmatched, at least in my experience. So yeah, it's true. I've seen it in action. It's very true.
Somebody's got to do it, right?
Absolutely. So do I need to switch over the scenes or are you able to screen share from this one?
So you should be able to pull up my presentation as the other feed and bring it on stage.
Okay. Do I click on the demo scene? Is that what you mean?
No. So on the top right, there should be a list of feeds, like where our camera feeds are in, and you should be able to enable.
Got it. Okay.
There we go. There we go. All right. Yeah, so I kind of butchered this together a little bit here. But yeah, so we're going to talk about like why GRC is actually important in the cloud, and especially in this day and age, and what GRC actually really is. Because I also realized that probably a good majority of the audience on this side might not be, fully aware of all of the different pros and cons. Let's see. this is a different format for me too. So I did give a little bit of information about me already. So president of Study GRC, also the director of community for Simply Cyber itself. Maybe you guys have heard of them. And then also I do daily live streaming now. So for the longest time, we did once a week meetings related to GRC just as a community. And then about almost 3 months ago, we started doing 5 days a week for various GRC related topics, just adding value to the community itself at large. Definitely huge on that empowering and fostering community itself. I realized just how difficult it is. And I do see you, Alana, there in chat too, nerding out on the standards and publications. And then I did give a little bit about my background there. So definitely hobby IT for many years, just doing it as a hobby and so forth. And then I really started trying to professionally pursue that back in November of 23. So a little bit before then, more like June or July, before I came across what GRC even was. I was really interested on the blue teaming side of it. And then Jerry really kind of kidnapped me away from that into GRC. And so one of the biggest reasons why is because like blue teaming, I think is extremely vital and it's really awesome as well. But one of the downsides is like, I enjoy doing that so much. I feel like if I did that full time as a blue teamer, then it would probably burn me out pretty quickly. Whereas like when I found GRC, it's not something that has really burned me out at all. I get excited to get up and dig more into it. Let's see. So then let's start off here with what is GRC before we start getting into some of the cloud related items. So governance, risk, and compliance. So let me move this over here for my own interface.
Hey, and speaking of moving, I'm trying to find a way to hide. I may have to hide the cameras just for a second so that it doesn't block unless you're able to move it.
Yeah, I wanted to make this full screen so it didn't look weird.
Oops, I broke it. There we go.
Yeah, and you can pull us off stage too, if you just do hide.
All right, there we go.
Perfect. All right. So moving along here. So governance, that's where you're looking at a lot of the operations, the C-suite, the policies and procedures. A lot of that stuff flows down from the governance end. You can see here accountability frameworks, decision making. That's where the whole governance flows down. And then we have risk, which typically you'll have like the risk management portion of it. We're trying to, identify and mitigate those different risks to the business itself. And one of the important things around GRC is that all three of these work together as a program itself. So if your organization is just doing just risk management or just compliance and they're not harmonizing these governance, risk, and compliance together, then you do not really have, by definition, a GRC program itself. A GRC program is supposed to be holistic with, harmonizing these together. Risk, there's so many different areas for that. There's a lot of different types of risk, from occupational safety to the large topic of information security for cybersecurity. There's so many different things that go underneath that. A large portion is understanding the business itself, the environment. What are the objectives and goals for the business? So that way you can really actually go through and say, hey, we only have this much budget and this is all of the different issues. So we need to work down from, the highest priority risk of what's going to affect this business down to the lowest priority with what budget and time and resources overall we have. And third party is also another huge one. And then we move into compliance. With compliance, you're typically working with the different regulations, laws, and acts that are on, typically the state or federal side of things is typically what you're looking for compliance. So very regulatory. You'll see a lot of different things like with privacy or GDPR, CCPA, and a lot of compliance that typically you'll see that flowed into the legal team even. And that's one of the other interesting aspects is that, it's pretty wide. It's a very broad topic. We talk about how information security or cybersecurity is extremely broad. GRC is just as much so, really. And so why does GRC even matter in the cloud at all? Well, if anything, I think it matters even more. I believe, yeah, so I do have it on here. So 80% of companies are facing increase in cloud incidences in the first place. So a large majority, I'm pretty sure it's over 80% of businesses are already in the cloud now, and more are converting over. Some businesses completely rely for their operations for the cloud. And the cloud, even with the shared responsibility that we'll look at here in a moment as well, it still has a lot of unique challenges, misconfigurations, unauthorized access, and data breaches, can still happen. And like I've actually heard people talk about how, oh, well, AWS has all of these different cool features. We should be fine. They do have a lot of services with any of these different cloud providers, but you have to actually understand, how to use them and to enable them as well. So it's still up to you, especially when it comes down to that data and what kind of services you're using. And, there's a lot of governance that should probably be done as well. I think that's another oversight that would happen, just because a lot of businesses try to, throw it all together and get it to work without thinking about secure by design or GRC by design. And that's what I'm actually going to petition towards the end of this, is that GRC by design. And the regulatory complexities, there's actually a huge benefit to going to cloud as well, because some may argue that it's actually easier to get some of these different compliances together for GDPR, HIPAA, FedRAMP. A lot of these different things, like AWS has some really awesome tools that can really speed things up for you. Some of the benefits of GRC in the cloud here. So stakeholder trust, reputation, and so forth. A large portion of businesses will go through and implement GRC, compliance, risk management for contractual requirements. So they go off, they get their SOC 2, or they go off and get their ISO 27K. So that way they can throw that into contracts or to meet contract requirements. There's also, a lot of different regulations in regards to data privacy, who's liable if something gets breached. So there's that entire side of things. And then also the cloud can also make it a little bit more efficient there too. So there's a lot of automations you could do. I mentioned a little bit about that a moment ago. And then also cost savings could be another one. So, because of the different tools that are available, it can make the process a lot easier. I think I got a little bit ahead on it a moment ago because, yes, there are different services inside of AWS, Azure, Google Cloud that can make this, the GRC aspect way easier to manage. And I believe Christoph has a couple different labs on some of this too, and I hope for more. But yeah, like AWS config, and there's a couple other ones too. Let's see. Yeah, like CloudTrail, I know he's got some on there for that. Guard Duty, I know PBO, which some of you guys may know, has done some information about Guard Duty. AWS Config is a big one. Azure Policy, the Security Center for Azure as well. There's a lot of different services that are built in that we don't have the luxury of on-prem. And then that also enables the cost savings aspect as well.
And deploying
enhanced security.
Yeah, and deploying them is so much faster too, because you don't have to wait for the hardware and then put the software on the hardware and then deploy that. It's usually just a few clicks or setting up some infrastructure as code and then pushing that out. So many of those services are really, really a lot faster to deploy than in the traditional on-prem sense, for sure.
Exactly. And that's also where the enhanced security aspect comes in as well. So you can have, especially if you think about it from the get-go, then you can enable these services a lot easier across your deployment. And then, of course, we have the shared responsibility model. I don't know if that's coming in. Oh, yeah, it's not coming in all the way. But I do have the link to that on the bottom here. So some of you may be familiar with the shared responsibility model. This is extremely important. I think a lot of people are aware of it, but I don't know. I still feel like a lot of businesses kind of neglect this. And the reason I feel that way is because we still have these data breaches in the cloud and best practices not being followed. There are I kind of feel like the old way of the cloud, people were like, oh, well, I'm renting this out. So, that's their job to handle. And that just is not the case. We do have the shared responsibility models. Definitely check that out for whichever platform and services you're utilizing. This does give you a pretty good idea of typically what you're going to be looking for. So it does depend on what platform you use or what service. But definitely, if nothing else, definitely the data, typically the different platform and applications on it, your networking that you have connected to it. There's a lot of different areas that the business itself is responsible for. And that needs to be clearly defined as well. You should have to go through and do like an asset inventory of some sort, and these should be included with that. So that way you actually understand. You can do like a network topography for what you have in that deployment as well, just so that way you realize everything that's connected to it. And then actually mark out like, hey, this is our duty. This is what we have to do. Maybe we should, secure this. Let's put in some networking. Some of the key challenges. So a big one is data sovereignty. So where the actual data is stored. I think that is like one of the bigger things impacting businesses in the cloud is where the data is actually stored, especially in today's world. If you're a US business, then you may have especially other issues where that data is stored. There's all kinds of different complexities with this. Countries around the world have different laws and requirements based on this as well. There's a whole thing around GDPR where it's way easier to maintain that data over there in the EU, and you have to take special precautions with that. But even outside of the EU, there's other issues as well when you look at China or Australia, because they also have their own laws and how things are supposed to work as well that affect their citizens. So there's a lot of different things that coincide with that. And so knowing where your data is actually at and then making sure that you're in compliance with these different regulations is extremely vital, especially if you're an international company that's got things around the world. It does make things pretty complicated there. Also, depending on the business size as well, it can get kind of complicated inside of the cloud. So, we're talking, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of different assets deployed in the cloud for businesses. And I'm sure there's some with hundreds of thousands even of different services deployed. So then you have that entire issue with, tracking that, managing that. And that's also where, it mentions auto scaling, but I don't feel that applies as much there. Third-party management as well. Verifying third-party compliance and collaboration. So there's also businesses that will collaborate with third parties in the cloud for shared drives or storage or platforms where they connect to a VPN and access information or otherwise. That definitely causes a threat vector as well. So that seems to be a very common occurrence. You also have a lot of services that have APIs or some type of remote access of some sort. And so that just expedites, the priority of what we should be doing here. One of the different, I believe to be benefits, like we had mentioned a moment ago, is the visibility. So I do feel, like misconfigurations is probably going to be one of the biggest ones that you should look out for. But also in the cloud, especially with AWS, they do make it pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but a pretty smooth process in order to try to identify and restrict those misconfigurations. Some of the major regulations, there's a lot of different stuff out there. So NIST is definitely my thing. I didn't throw that up here just because I knew I'd already be talking about it. You have the NIST CSF 2.0. You also have the 853 and then also FedRAMP. And so FedRAMP is the 853 for the cloud, which is extremely common for government contractors and the government. So some of the other ones, I mentioned GDPR out of the EU for privacy. There's also HIPAA, which is for health data. So PHI, PCI DSS, if you're doing anything with credit cards. And then also the CCPA is a California privacy for the consumer privacy. There's a lot of other different regulations and so forth out there. I wanted to just mention some of those other frameworks. So NIST and ISO are probably the most common that you're going to hear about. One of the downsides with ISO, and I'll actually pull up the course here in a moment. Before we end this, I'll drop it in chat because there is a really good course on ISO in particular that I think we should share. It's completely free, and one of the big issues with ISO is it's extremely common, except for the fact that it is paywalled. So you do have to buy the documents. They cost hundreds of dollars, and that does restrict your people's ability to upskill, especially in my space with Study GRC and so forth. A large portion of it is self-study, just trying to upskill to break in and so forth. And that really hinders that when, things get paywalled like that, especially something as big and common as ISO. It's all over the place. Whereas NIST is completely free and open source for everything. It's a U.S. government agency. All right. And one of the big reasons I wanted to mention those is because even if you are an architect, an engineer in the cloud, catching up on this information is very beneficial to not only your success moving forward as GRC gets more popular in the cloud itself, but then also just for your professional performance. If you can go into a meeting or an interview and you're able to talk about some of this from the business side of things, as GRC is kind of like the middleman between the engineers and the business end, then you're going to be perceived a little bit differently there than I would say most people who are just deploying things in the cloud for a business. Staying up to date is also hugely important. If you guys already work in the space, or if you are still working on breaking in or otherwise, you've probably realized that it is a very fast moving industry, whether it's the cloud or just the IT sector in itself. It's the exact same thing in GRC. So things get updated all the time. New publications come out. Old things get, updated and, thrown out. So staying up to date is also extremely vital, especially when you're looking at the regulatory and the different frameworks. So you could definitely check out CSA, so Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Security Alliance, ISAC, and NIST. They all have their own regulatory newsletters that you could follow for their updates and so forth. ISA is probably one of the top ones for cloud, I would say. Automations. So I mentioned a couple of the things earlier. So you could set up different automations, for an example, with AWS config or Azure policy to help enforce a lot of this different stuff. And then also establish, a team, a dedicated team that actually has to go through and, conduct audits. You could do an internal audit. There's a lot of resources out there. One of the things that I've seen a lot of that actually helps a lot of, especially small and medium businesses that have nothing, is just going through and building a risk register. That's a really good first step. You should also have a asset inventory where you have a list of all the assets of value to your organization, but also building a risk register will identify, and get you thinking about, we have this one location for all of our backups up in the cloud and we have nothing else. So after you go through and brainstorm of all the bad things that could go wrong and their likelihood and impact, then that gives you an idea of like, oh, wow, yeah, this could really negatively impact us. We should probably take care of this. And it's still surprising to hear people talk about it, because I have had people talk about how, oh, yeah, we have never done that before, but we did. And yeah, we found quite a few different issues with that. And now we are pursuing on mitigating these and putting controls in place to reduce this risk and impact to our organization. And one of those examples was a backup where, they just had one single backup in the cloud. And if anything ever happened to it, they had nothing else. They would have lost their entire backup and who knows. And especially nowadays with how popular ransomware is, that's extremely likely to occur. It would definitely be within realms. Regular cycles as well. So GRC is not a one and go. It never is. It is not a checkbox thing. You'll see, I wouldn't say that it's the old way of doing things, because I still feel that it's done. A lot of people will talk about questionnaires and checkboxing. That is not the best way to do it. You need to actually act upon it. So actions need to be taken, otherwise you're not really doing your part. So going through and documenting based on your compliance on a checklist or a questionnaire is great, but then you actually need to come up with a plan of action and milestones to stick to. And also do a regular cycle. So a lot of organizations will go through and have like an annual audit where they go through and they'll conduct an assessment on their, entire cloud or their entire business, and maybe they'll cycle between them, just so that way they keep up to date with everything. And also, especially in business, things change quickly, and in the cloud, it can change extremely quick. It's even faster than on-prem, because you can go from 0 to 100 very, very rapidly in the cloud. All it takes is a credit card. So yeah, definitely some big stuff to keep in mind. And even once you enable these different services like AWS Config or Azure Policy, there's about a dozen other options out there as well. Then you still need to review those. You still need to check those alerts. You still need to go through and verify that the information's correct, because things also outdate quickly. We were recently talking about policies over on the Study GRC live stream. And one of the things I mentioned was how policies should have a pulse. That policies are not really a living document, but they should have a pulse. So that's the bare minimum as well. It's something that shouldn't be just done once and forgotten about. It should be on a regular schedule. So the cost of inaction, pretty big. One of my favorite things to throw out there is the reputational loss, which I went ahead and put question marks for, because that's very true. It definitely depends on the business. It depends on what occurred, but this is also why. So the average data breach, we're looking at about $4.5 million practically for the average breach cost. Also, like the 287 days was from a report from CISA. If you guys are not familiar with CISA, CISA.gov, CISA.gov, absolutely amazing organization as well. And they have a lot of resources available, especially if you are working for a medium or large business. They do have a lot of resources available to assist. And I hope that still continues to go on. CISA's done great things for the private sector. But those are some things to consider. So when you're looking at 287 days to identify and contain a breach, that is a huge problem. And that's the average across the board. There have been data breaches even recently where they didn't even identify it until years later. That should definitely be noticed as a negligence of sorts. So keeping that in mind, like, this is why it's so vital. And also, data breaches can also put out small businesses. If your business is still small or even medium, a lot of these businesses can't take that hit. So you could be looking at literally losing the business itself just from a single data breach, especially when you take into account the legal and regulatory side of things. And if you didn't take any precautions whatsoever, there are some different states, I believe, like Iowa, Ohio, and a couple other states as well, are actually enacting, I forget what it's named off the bat. If Dwight's in chat, he'll definitely drop it. But they are enacting different laws within the states that will actually provide some protections to the businesses that do take best practices, because a lot of businesses are not even doing best practice. And if you at least do the bare minimum, then they do provide you some protections as far as getting sued when there is a data breach that occurs. Because if you haven't heard it before, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And that's what we're preparing for, is that resilience on, okay, if we do get hit, what is going to happen and how can we limit that impact? And that's also the whole aspect around that risk and governance side in GRC, is, limiting that impact. We're never going to get 100%. There is no way you can have 100% security or, risk reduction, but we can get as close to that figure as possible within the constraints of our budget and time, resources availability. And I think, I definitely wanted to focus on that reputation a little bit, because I've seen that it seems like that affects businesses more than even the data breach cost. So that's a really important thing to figure out and to think about, because it's also very difficult to come up with those figures. And I think that's something that a lot of businesses, they might think about, oh, it's not going to look good if we do that, but oh, they'll still, pay us. And we've seen in the past where businesses will lose a large portion of their customer base or clients after following a data breach itself. So, and a lot of people seem to be getting pretty irritated with this 2 years of credit checks as a token of surviving it. So I've mentioned some of this different stuff already. We're coming to an end here shortly, but so NIST 837 is going to be a really awesome resource to go through and do. So that's 837. That's going to be about the RMF, so the risk management framework. They go through and define how you can really build that risk management framework out and get things started. This is not the exact process for that, but this is a pretty good outline of where you should be kind of looking. So you want to kind of evaluate what are your capabilities, what is your purpose, doing your asset inventory, identifying like what even applies to your business, what frameworks do we need to follow, what regulatory standards do we need to do, so what are we focusing on and why are we doing it? And then also selecting the proper providers and tool usage. So like we mentioned, there's a lot of different services within AWS and Azure and Google Cloud that you can utilize to improve these programs, and leveraging those tools makes it so much easier. And you got to figure that kind of out. It's a lot easier to do that from the get-go than later on. Also the access control policies and procedures, going through with your SOPs, standard operating procedures, is extremely vital to the business. That allows people to understand what the missions are, what the objectives, the buy-in from the C-suite or shareholders, and then also how things are expected to be completed. And then we go kind of into that risk management side of things. So manage the risk, developing strategies to address threats. That's where we need to go through and start assessing. We have the tools, we know what we should be doing, we know what we're capable of. So now we need to actually act upon that and start doing these assessments, start mitigating them. There's a lot of different things that flow underneath each and every single one of these. And then outside of those different assessments, we should also be doing that monitoring as well. I believe that's another area where a lot of businesses will fail, is that they go through and they do their minimum annual audit, and then after that, they just kind of fall off. So they may do a few things here and there, but monitoring is extremely important. And that's also when you're looking at things like SIMs and AWS config, because things move quickly, especially in the cloud, and having those different automation tools is very, very useful. And it needs to be checked on a regular basis. Some of the different best practices. So definitely nowadays, automations. I think there's definitely a love-hate relationship to it to some extent. I believe PBO, who he streams on Tuesday nights, he's been talking about AWS a lot lately, and he's shown some of the different automations and talked about it previously. And it's a really useful thing. So like it states here, is reduces human error and saves valuable time. There's a lot of different things that need to be done, and it's very time consuming and expensive to an organization, which is one of the biggest constraints is budget. So the resources available to actually put it into. Continuous compliance. I was just talking about monitoring, not just at audit time, but ongoing. And that's also goes in with keeping up to date, because regulations change. Different things can happen very rapidly, especially if you're running international. There's so many different complexities that could be going on. And then also training employees. So a GRC-aware culture, really, it's just a security-aware culture is what I would kind of say. But implementing some level of GRC awareness into your security awareness training, I feel is extremely vital, because then they have a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. So if you have employees that are, checking these logs or ensuring misconfigurations are correct, making sure that these services are enabled and monitored, they may not have thought about, why are we doing this? Okay, well, we have to be FedRAMP compliant because of our $10 million, government contract. And if we fail this, then the business is getting shut down, or 100 people are going to be laid off. I feel like many businesses are not transparent enough about that, because there's a lot of cases where that is actually very well true, where things need to be done a very particular way, and then employees, I wouldn't say necessarily take a shortcut to it, but they don't fully understand the overall picture of it from the business operation side of things. They're just told what to do without being explained why it's important. And I believe that's also a really good aspect when it comes to company culture, is just some of that transparency, because I feel, especially being in those different positions, having a deeper understanding of what the business objectives are and why we're doing what we're doing really gets you more involved and invested in that business. And, hopefully that assists in that program. And, you could implement that very easily with your security awareness training. Just making sure that they're aware of, risk management practices, why, we're doing certain things. Phishing is absolutely massive. That should already be covered. And I believe I mentioned another thing here in a moment. And then documenting. So there's so much documentation. There really is. But also, it definitely depends on the business itself. But like PBO has mentioned as well, that, there's system security policies that he's seen that are 600, 700, 800 pages in length. And I feel like that makes things very difficult. So you can split that up too. I've also seen where, it's based on department for a lot of these policies and procedures and different guidelines to follow, just to break it down. So that way, if somebody's in a, SOC center, for an example, for a security operations center, and they're not sure, what process they're supposed to follow or what it's supposed to be on this thing, and they're having difficulty finding that, that's where breaking down a lot of this stuff from hundreds of pages to a very easily searchable, help desk type of platform could make a huge difference. Because I've also been in that seat where, I'm sure something exists on it, but there's so much information that it's difficult to locate. And there's a whole thing around policy development and management there. So some of the different common mistakes, especially related to the cloud itself. So outdated policies, not understanding, what we're doing in there, and, the cloud architecture changing from what was originally intended. Still using on-prem thinking. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to mention that shared responsibility, is because it's so important to understand what your responsibility is. I feel like that's kind of not accounted for well enough. Misunderstanding responsibilities that coincides with that. Inadequate training. So a lot of individuals, they may be very familiar with the cloud services for deploying XYZ, but they are not GRC. So that definitely has its own challenges. I was talking about that a moment ago. And a large portion of this also coincides with misconfigurations as well. So Christoph could probably confirm this, but I'm pretty sure misconfigurations is the top risk to cloud.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's still king, definitely.
Yeah, it's very surprising. But I also have to give it to people, because this is also where the inadequate training, and also things can just get very confusing in the cloud as well. So I'm not trying to do a blame game or anything else, because it can be extremely easy to misconfigure something and not even realize it until it's way too late down the road, which is where these other tools and going through and monitoring and auditing these things come in. Some of the different future trends in cloud GRC. So AI-driven security, we're definitely seeing a lot more AI get pushed out and so forth. I think it's a very interesting space. I'm sure some of you have read some of the different articles on this. I believe Gemini, so Google just pushed out a AI security suite of sorts into their AI studio just a few days ago. And this is something that's just going to keep evolving. It's definitely going to be utilized as a tool. There's services that are independent, separate, that connect to your SIM or other software that are literally doing SOC level 1 work at this point with AI. And so this is definitely something to keep up with. It's moving very rapidly. There are a couple different resources out there for AI in particular as well. This is in regards to the detection and automated response for security. But there's also the NIST AI framework, and then there's also the MITRE Atlas, which is another framework for AI. security checks and so forth. Real-time compliance automation with regulatory intelligence. There are ISACs that you could join based on your industry. Healthcare is a really big sector of that. And I've seen some of the different tools for those automations where, especially when you're working internationally, this can become very, very complicated, and staying up to date with that is very important. And that's also one of the different benefits with cloud, is where you can literally go through and you could deploy, configure out for FedRAMP or for CIS or a lot of these different frameworks pretty rapidly. Holistic approaches. So this is like what I'm fighting for here is, security and compliance kind of commingling together. I feel like, especially after attending several conferences, I wouldn't say that the security side looks down upon GRC in a way, but I think it's way more similar than a lot of people realize. And I think it's also because it's new too. GRC is definitely different than the engineering side of things or the information security side, even though it flows underneath that. But I think kind of coming to breaking down those barriers and collaborating really is where it's going to move forward. At this point in time, we're losing the race, and it may not make many people happy out there, but it is true. The security industry has been fighting in this battle for decades now, and it's still not looking bright. And that's why breaking down these barriers, stopping these silos, being more aware of the different departments out there, because when at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is those business objectives to keep the business operating. That's one of the major things with GRC, and just opening those barriers, talking to people, understanding that it's all a shared mission. Quantum safe security. We're seeing some of that stuff coming out too. I think that it does still apply to cloud, especially, but it's still another thing that's out there. One of the other things I will also mention here that I didn't add is blockchain. So if you don't already know about blockchain, I would definitely do some research on it, because that is becoming a massive area as well. Because you can do the integrity and track things so easily with that. It's becoming massive in a lot of different industries, and they're being implemented across a lot of things. There is approximately a 98% estimated growth of blockchain audit over the next 5 years. So that's becoming in a huge area. Some of the different next steps. So like I had mentioned earlier, Study GRC, we do stream 5 days a week. However, Thursday nights is actually our primary meetings. So you could definitely check us out at studygrc.org. We have the platforms that we stream to, a link to our Discord, and also our calendar and resources pages there as well. It is definitely evolving and moving along pretty rapidly, but it's a pretty chill, community itself. We're just there to learn and grow together, help each other out along the way. That's a good spot on top of some of those organizations that I also mentioned regarding GRC in particular. Going through with your assets, enforce MFA, please. If you do not have MFA enabled for everything, that is a really good place to start. So in this day and age, yes. So I may even say, you should probably enable MFA before you even assess the assets, because that makes a huge difference. A lot of these different breaches are happening just because of no MFA. And there's very few services that don't accept MFA at this current point in time. And with that part said too, Christoph has some great videos on the billing alerts inside the cloud, but then also, don't use your root accounts either. I'm sure you guys have also heard before, John was home on the weekend, didn't want to have to go into the office because, a server was having a problem, and he just logged into the remote user from home. That's another area in relation to that to an extent. And staying informed, subscribe. There's a lot of organizations. IAPP was another one that I hadn't mentioned that's around the privacy side, especially if you're looking international. That's a really good one. And then here's my rant about GRC by design. So many of you are probably familiar with Secure by Design, but I am trying to petition for GRC by design. And why is that? So GRC by design does follow above the secure by design. So security itself is involved with GRC to an extent as well. And I think that the security by design is a great idea that should still be followed, of course, and so forth. And there's still a lot of work to do with that. A lot of businesses still aren't even following security by design, which has been pushed for a long time at this point. But then also we need to take into account the GRC by design. How are we going to audit, to assess this? How are we going to monitor what we're doing? What kind of policies and procedures, what kind of guidelines do we need while we're building this out? Or, how are we going to manage this program when this deployment is finished? That's something that should be thought about and, figured out from the get-go. A lot of businesses put it as a second thought because they're more worried about going through and getting that deployment out. But it does make the process a lot easier when it's not bolted on. In my opinion, it seems like GRC is more oftentimes bolted onto something, which I wouldn't say that it makes it less effective, but it definitely makes the implementation from the get-go a lot more difficult to begin with. And then same thing with security by design. That's where the whole security by design aspect comes in, is because it's way easier to do it from the get-go when you're building something than after you have it all assembled and, now we need to go through and we need to take these, foundations out. We need to take these pillars down because, and replace those with, security. Tearing it apart and just adding things and bolting things on after the fact is very ineffective. It costs more money. And then you also could have a gap there as well. And as in a gap, I'm referring to the fact that, you're going to have a gap of time as well, because it seems like there's also a lot of industries or companies that will deploy something and then they will wait until they have to, and then they'll start implementing GRC after the fact. Same thing with security, and it's just stop doing that, please. We definitely need to keep continually pushing this and explaining why it's not a good idea to bolt it on after the fact. It's still a good idea to bolt it on, but it's way better and easier and more effective from the get-go. So some of the conclusions. So GRC is absolutely fundamental, especially in this day and age. It is very, very fundamental to every aspect of it, especially with the different regulations and requirements that are flowing out. It's definitely something that every business should be aware of. Even small businesses are more than capable of enacting something. Doing something is better than nothing. Definitely understand that shared responsibility model. Keep an eye on the misconfigurations and some of the different high points on the misconfigurations, enable MFA, and so forth as well. Keep in mind about GRC, governance, risk, and compliance by design. And just think about that when you're building or deploying a lot of these things out there in the cloud. How are we going to manage this? How is this going to be assessed? Oh, should we do this or should we do this differently? Is definitely some of the stuff to think about. And then also, the cloud moves so rapidly, like there's also policies that coincide with that, policies and procedures, guidelines that coincide with different aspects or assets that may not even be developed until well after the fact because it wasn't thought about from the get-go. Continuous journey, it is, adapt and improve. It's all about just, you can compare this to the pyramid of pain on, just doing what you can and just adapting and improving over time. It's not a one and go kind of thing. And it's definitely a long-term program. So doing something is better than nothing there. Some of the different stuff, this is some of the different things that you could look at. So I mentioned some of these frameworks for the standards before, FedRAMP, CSF, 853, ISO, some of the provider resources as well. AWS has well-architected framework that you could take a look at. AWS also has all kinds of different resources available out there. Same with Azure, and Google also have their own dedicated resources as well. And then we have these organizations, CSA, ISACA, and OWASP, Cloud Security Project. There's a lot more that coincides with it. And then now, the Q&A, definitely drop your questions. A big aspect for me is community, collaboration, talking with people, no matter what side of the teams you are on. That's where breaking down barriers, fostering collaboration and community comes in. You're more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, join our Discord server, and so forth. However, I can assist you. And if I don't know something, then I'm pretty confident I know somebody who would. Thank you
Chris,
for
thank you,
attending my
sir.
TED
That was
Talk.
awesome. I really appreciate it. So we're gonna wait for questions to come in, but as we do that, I've got a question for you. Actually, I've got a couple questions, so we can get started with that. But please go ahead and
Oh
submit your
boy.
questions through chat. I'll keep an eye out, and Chris can keep an eye out as well, and we'll make sure those questions get answered. Before I dive into my question, though, I want to mention, as far as I'm concerned, you've achieved, or we've achieved our objective today, because we got this comment that came through on the cyber chat side that says, it's ringing in my head that it's not just a checkbox. I didn't know about this topic until now. I'm already looking for courses. Thank you. So that's exactly what I was hoping to get, the sort of feedback with this presentation, because I think a lot of times it does kind of come across as, oh, we just need to check this box in order to get this contract or to get the certifications, whatever it is that the organization's trying to get by being FedRAMP compliant or whatever else. And that's not the case. It's absolutely not supposed to be the case. So as far as I'm concerned, Chris, you did an awesome job and achieved your objective just from that single comment alone. So if anybody else got a light bulb moment from this presentation, please let us know in chat. It's always great to see feedback like this. But on that
Yeah.
note, my question, or my first question is, and somebody mentioned that blockchain for audits kind of seems like magic, and I agree with that. I feel like this is something where blockchain auditing is actually a really good use case of blockchain, but it's not something that I'm super familiar with. So do you have any sorts of insights or maybe learning resources that we can pull up and take with us as we research this after the fact?
Yeah, I know B-Dubs is in chat, and so she has a really good resource for free training that is in regards to that. One of the biggest areas that we're seeing that in is with the credit card companies, like with PCI DSS. So the credit card companies, there's 3 or 4 major players out there in the space globally. I know one of them has fully converted over to blockchain for transactions. And then I believe it's MasterCard that's looking at doing it now. But then also just storing data, you're utilizing blockchain as in a database for that integrity checks. So, and then it makes it a lot easier to audit.
And that's kind of the whole point. Well, not the whole point. I know a lot of, like, we had cryptocurrency and things like that came off of that. But that's kind of the point of the blockchain is providing that immutable visibility that you can trace back and look into and see exactly what's happened with it. But the pain. Okay, I was going to say, it sounds like you had another question, but that was the question is how do we start to implement that? B-Dubs, if you are in chat, go ahead and drop that link and I can amplify it to all the different channels. If you don't have that link yet, then let's go ahead and dig it up after the fact and let's submit it on both Discords, because I'm also frankly pretty interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, I got it in my bookmark somewhere. Somewhere among the resources.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't have that many resources, right? Not a document full of a bunch of resources like all of us. So I'm trying to see if there's other questions here, scrolling back through chat. Any questions that we haven't answered yet?
I'm skimming through it now. The checkbox mentality is definitely an issue. That is probably what most businesses are currently conducting, and it is true that is not the right way. You can use a checkbox methodology to get things started to an extent, but that's not a one and done situation. And quite frankly, I think that's why GRC has a bad name, is because people are so used to getting a checkbox questionnaire, and that's what kind of made GRC look bad.
My second question, I don't know if you're able to comment on this yet or not, but I think the timing was comical, because yesterday I was on X and scrolling through, and somebody was talking about how GDPR is potentially about to go through a fairly major overhaul, or at least pretty significant revisions. Is that true? Let's fact check it first and foremost. And second, do you have any sort of insights as to what that might look like?
Yeah, I haven't looked too deep into that. I do believe that is true. I did see a couple things on that as well. One of the best places for that is going to be IAPP. They cover this stuff extremely closely. So they have their actual news side of things, and I'm going to drop this link here so you could relay it. But so this is the GDRP page through IAPP. They focus on the privacy side of things, including especially the GDPR. They have some of the most up-to-date information out there. You can access almost all of their information for no cost. As soon as a signature is put on a piece of paper, they're already posting about it on their news side. So that's where I would definitely try to keep up to date with that section. And they probably already have something on there as well. But I did hear something about that already, how GDPR was looking at revising again.
Yeah, Chris, my last question for you is, if somebody's tuning in here, maybe they're coming from the cloud side and they're interested in learning more about GRC, like that comment we saw earlier, what are some ways for them to dip their toes into that and really get started and chew into GRC a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So probably the best method to go off the bat is, so if you go to our YouTube channel, and I'll drop the link for this as well, we have a lot of different playlists. And I think this is one of the biggest issues, is that businesses and people want to upskill in GRC, or we even see this in cybersecurity, where red teaming has a ton of stuff out there, blue teaming has some stuff now, and then GRC has a ton of stuff, but it's spread across everything and everywhere, and it's very difficult to find anything of good quality. And so that's also where Study GRC kind of formatted, is because it's so difficult to find good quality resources and people and community in this space. There's also another location that's called CUI Discord. And so that is in regards to GRC risk management compliance in the government sector. Really awesome information over there. But then also just going to our website, you can see a list of different communities and resources on our resources page. But typically the number one go-to resource is our What is GRC and What It's Like playlist on YouTube. And that's really the number one place to go. So that's going to give you a complete breakdown of like what it is to be working in GRC, what it truly means, and then also breaks down that governance, risk, and compliance aspects as well. So if you go through that playlist and then you're still interested in GRC, you're probably a pretty good fit.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I don't think we have any other questions yet. If anything comes in after the fact, then please let us know. Like I said, you can reach us on both Discord, LinkedIn, and even on YouTube here. So I dropped some links on ways for you to reach out to Chris. We've got the Discords. I'll do that one more time so we can have them in here.
Did you drop your Discord as well?
Yeah, I'm dropping both in here. So you can join both Cyber's Discord and Study GRC's Discord. Of course, both of them are completely free to join. And then you can DM us on either of those. I'm in his, he's in mine as well. So we're pretty easy to find. We're also very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect there and share resources as well. Any last minute things, Chris? And I keep forgetting, my marketing team is going to be really upset with me, but I keep forgetting to mention, please go ahead and subscribe to the Cyber YouTube as well. So if you found this helpful, we do these live streams almost on a monthly basis on various types of topics. We bounce around both red teaming and blue teaming. So if you find this helpful, please give us a subscribe on the Cyber YouTube channel, and also check out the Study GRC YouTube. They do a lot more live streams than I do. It's, I think, multiple a week at this point, right? So definitely check them out.
Yeah, 5 or more a week at this point. Thank you so much for having me come up. Thank you to everybody who attended. I just love putting the value out there, and just great resources. This is where the whole fostering collaboration and community comes in, and breaking down these different silos and barriers here. Thank you all, GRC Mafia. And especially if you guys do have questions, reach out. I'm more than happy to direct you to somebody who can assist if I'm not able to. Also, don't forget, you can also put comments down below the video as well.
And then we had a question that just came in at the end there. Chris, maybe take it offline. I don't know if you saw it, so I just wanted to point it out. I believe it came in on your side.
I see it.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning of this is going to be recorded, so we'll be sending this out, and it'll also be available for replay on YouTube. So if you want the replay and you don't see it in the next couple of days here, let me know, shoot me a DM, and I'll be glad to send you a direct link to it. But otherwise, thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us today. I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for your time, and maybe we can do this again sometime soon. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
I always forget how to end the live stream, so it might actually take me a couple more